edition of African View with me, Yoditat Masu. And today's edition, we are going to have a little talk about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is becoming very popular. We are using it everywhere in every aspect of our life. So, what is it about, and how are we going to monitor it? Who is going to control it? We are going to discuss about this and many more other topics with Mr. Swapneel Mehta. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Uh, I know you have a lot of extensive experience in AI, so could you please start by introducing yourself?
Yeah, thank you for having me. My name is Swapneel Mehta. I am formerly a postdoctoral associate at MIT and Boston University. I got my PhD working in data science, and I used to work on elections integrity at Twitter and then do research into feeds integrity at Oxford. I now run a nonprofit where we combat public deception campaigns all around the world. We are spread across 23 countries where we work with newsrooms, national nonprofits, and regulators to show you what shapes your social media feed before it starts shaping how you think.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. That's very interesting. So we are going to discuss about Africa and the AI use. So Africa is embracing artificial intelligence faster than like any other developing nation, and at unprecedented pace we are using it. So do you think Africa is ready for AI, or are we biting more than what we can chew? What do you think?
I think it's a good question. The idea of being ready for AI is one that's kind of unexpected because I don't think any country has been completely ready for the changes that AI has brought about. And that's exactly why we have discussions about job loss and is it replacing humans or is it augmenting humans? What are the potential economic impacts and societal impacts and climate impacts of AI? So I think it's a stretch to say any country was completely ready for the disruption that AI has brought about it. What I do think in the case of Africa is the outcome of AI introduction is certainly going to impact a few sectors quite a bit. But from a preparedness standpoint, the infrastructure that is required for large scale training, the data centers, the compute, the kind of linguistic diversity that AI has to capture, in that sense, AI might not be as ready for Africa. So I think the important element there is infrastructure and capacity need to be able to sustain in order to train larger models, and that's something I think needs a bit of work in most countries. And it's really a very general statement to say Africa because it's so diverse as a continent. It's hard to say if everyone is ready or everyone is not ready. So I think locally opinions would vary, but I think as a continent, it's certainly AI needs more readiness to enter Africa than Africa needs readiness to host AI.
Okay. That's a very philosophical way to put it. And AI has shown a great advantage in various sectors, especially the healthcare when we look at it, and education in various levels of the education, agriculture, public services, in various sectors, it has been advantageous. So, which sector do you believe would present a transformative impact in the feasibility the future? If you were to choose the three sectors, which are going to be more impacted by this AI technology?
For me, I think the fundamental advantage of having AI in public sector services delivery is simply replacing mundane processes that we simply don't have humans to take on. So, form filling and form assessments, kind of understanding some large volumes of data, but from a very basic standpoint, like problems that are already solved, like text summarization or identifying names and entities from text. These are the kinds of use cases where I feel in public services delivery, AI can accelerate a lot of tasks where we simply didn't have enough humans to staff. The other two sectors that I feel are very promising are one, healthcare, and the second, potentially agriculture. Because I feel like a lot of these advancements that are being made on the technology side have impact on agriculture, and as like a sector that employs probably the largest workforce in the world, it becomes like a very scalable outcome. Even if you solve one tiny problem in agriculture, it ends up impacting a lot more people. Similarly for healthcare, right? Like if you solve one set of problems in healthcare, whether it is on the diagnostic side, whether it is on the kind of drug delivery side, whether it is on the patient understanding side, the sheer scale of people that require healthcare services that could be impacted by this make it a very lucrative area to deploy good, reliable AI systems.
Uh, quite interesting. Thank you very much. So it's going to be used by various sectors, and it's going to be very advantageous, especially for Africa that's relying heavily on agriculture. Utilizing this kind of artificial intelligence could be the key to feeding the continent or self-reliance in the food sector. I'm guessing that's the point that we are going to make.
Mhm.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
So there are two sides to everything, and when it comes to AI, we are observing it being used to create fake news and to spread misinformation, commit fraud. Just the other day, I was looking at a social media, and there was a reel about a religious leader saying something that's against the belief of that person, and people that are following, they see that person talking, that see that it's that person, but it is talking about something negative. So how are we going to realize or how monitor these kinds of things? How do we know that it's fake, and how do we, become reliable? When we look at these forms, which form of AI abuse should African governments look out for?
So here's the thing that I have found in the last several years of working in this space, especially on the rebuilding of digital trust. The challenge that we're dealing with now is you cannot trust most things you see online, because
Yes.
there could be potential manipulation of the content, of the agenda, of the narrative, of the people who are promoting the content. So there are different levels of public deception that influence what we see every day. And we have seen this in the case of elections, healthcare, democracy, and policy. So my biggest worry is AI would potentially cause a lot more democratic backsliding than we have already seen, even when AI is relatively immature as a technology that has potential harms at global scale. Right. So when you can imagine AI matures and there are real harms possible in minutes at a global scale, that's part of where I'm extremely worried it would impact how democracy is perceived online. The solution is not an easy one to think about, but what we have so far thought about is the fact that in general humans are better at detecting or determining if content is trustworthy when they spend some time thinking about the content. Whenever you scroll past a post on social media, as you brought up, you're not really thinking about the content because your mind is already at the next piece of content that you're scrolling to. And therefore, your ability to discern or identify, hey, should I really believe what this previous post said, is already affected because you see a very large volume of content. And this gets even worse when you move from text based content to video based content, because it simply overwhelms our sensory perception or our ability to quickly identify potentially misleading signals. So, what we do at my nonprofit is try to make those signals accessible to the same human beings that are trying to scroll past these posts, just so that you think twice before you share something, before you like something, before you post a response to it, or before you promote it or forward it to a different group. The idea behind doing this is, at the end of the day, it's really hard to say that there is an objective truth in every situation. The truth changes with time and it changes with facts as they emerge over time. Almost every piece of truth is a point in time concept. There's very little that you can say is objectively true always, and everyone will agree to it. So, in that kind of ecosystem, these signals are really helpful for you to make a decision in the moment about whether or not a piece of information is trustworthy. So that is what I think the future will look like, where we simply have signals around what we see online. And it's our job to then determine whether or not we really want to believe in that piece of information.
Okay. Well, that's well and good, but when we look at the information that I told you about was a video of
Hmm.
the same person. It's an AI, but it looks like that person, the dress, the way it speaks, and everything was the same. And people were already, when I looked at the comments, people were already commenting, "Oh, how could he say this?" That kind of thing. So it's a real
Hmm.
thing. Nobody, unless you are really looking, you cannot distinguish. And for, like you said, if someone is scrolling through and seeing that, oh, they are going to believe it.
So we were actually building systems to detect exactly these kinds of outcomes, because the thing is, with a lot of these videos, the earlier you detect it, the better it is for people to try to avoid believing in it. And so the time to action on flagging these kinds of pieces of content is really important. Now, social media platforms themselves have their teams working on classifiers and moderation systems that can flag videos. But in and of itself, AI generated content can't necessarily violate policies. So there are some disclosures and transparency policies that some platforms have that you may violate. But by and large, the challenge is it's not a violation to upload an AI generated piece of content. It's a violation to pretend that that piece of content is about a real person saying a real thing. And so the line is very fine between production of such content and positioning of such content that makes it violate a certain policy. And that's where it's really important for us to build decentralized systems. You can't rely on every platform to adjudicate its own content, because we have seen historically that there are two problems there. One, most of them are not good at moderating content in languages outside of English to the level that they can moderate English language content, which means the rest of the world is going to suffer more than the English speaking countries that primarily consume that content. The second problem is there is no incentive that they've had to invest in upgrading those systems. So they've historically had a lot more focus on the US and a lot less focus on the global majority, because it's simply, for a variety of reasons, it's too much of too large of a problem to tackle. Sometimes it's too diverse of a problem to tackle, and then it goes back to what I said before: AI systems don't perform equally well in every language. So it's also not like they can simply scale their existing content moderation pipelines to other languages trivially, and that's where the problem arises. So that's where we need external systems where you and I can signal to other people that, hey, this is likely untrue. And that's where community based methods come in, and that's part of why we work with journalists all around the world, because they are the integrity workers that protect the public against potential manipulation, and they have done this for decades. It was just that they lost the tools and data access to do this as fast in recent times. So we provide both those tools and the data access so that you can see who shapes your feed before it shapes your views.
Okay, it's really good that you're in the process of creating a detector for these kinds of things, which would make our job, like you said, journalists have the responsibility to look at these kinds of misinformation and present it to the public the way it is, that it is fake and it's not real, before it spreads a lot of hate speech and that kind of disputes. So your engagement in this detection would help the journalists and the general public in this extent. So, moving on to my next question, it is about the youngsters. You know, teenagers are among the biggest users of AI, and they are always challenging themselves to create the next best thing. Looking at the AI softwares, while AI can support learning and creativity in youngsters, it can also expose these young people to misinformation because they are naive, they have not matured that much. Harmful contents can be seen, privacy risks are there, and even emotional manipulation. We have seen it in developed nations, even in African nations. Also, it's spreading that there's a lot of bullying and taking advantage of youngsters using this AI method. So, what are the biggest dangers facing children and teenagers, and what precautions should parents and the schools and technology companies take to protect these youngsters? What are our responsibilities?
So you raise a very valid point that younger audiences are far more engaged with AI systems than a lot of older audiences, and thereby they're far more susceptible to the socio-psychological risks that emerge with this parasocial relationship they're creating with their AI chatbots and AI companions. That allows for two or three different risks that I think of that are top of mind for me. One is the impact on their well-being, where they were already consuming content on social media that was kind of, everyone is living their best life on social media,
Mm.
and all you can see is content that makes you feel like you are missing out on so many good things
Mm.
because everyone else's life is so much better.
Yeah,
And
it can be
that's the
devastating
funny
for
thing
them.
is, yeah, and the funny thing is all of us feel that way. And so it's
Yeah.
really funny that even though we present our best lives online, we still feel like someone else has a better life online.
Mm.
And that creates this feeling of missing out, and just lack of participation in things you could have, or good things in life you couldn't have. And AI makes this even worse because now the content is not just the content that gives you FOMO, the content is also extremely persuasive.
Mm.
AI can generate as persuasive content as humans, if not more. And that makes it even more dangerous for a younger audience to be consuming this content almost 3 to 6 hours a day. Right around the world, the average time we spend on social media seems to be reaching about 2 hours a day, and a little above that. And this is not just younger audiences, this is all audiences. Last year in the US, more people consumed content from social video than they did from TV for the first time in history, which is an incredible milestone where we've basically converted our TVs into portable devices and taken them with us everywhere, and we call that a smartphone. And now we just consume large volumes of content from there. So, the two or three things that I worry about a lot is parasocial relationships could really hinder development and critical thinking. Um, if I have an AI chatbot to go to for every question I ask, I might even stop thinking about those questions critically. The second thing I worry about is the isolation effects. We have seen already that children in schools starting to say, we didn't know what to ask the teacher, so we just went to ChatGPT and started asking the questions there because we were afraid to ask the teacher the questions. And that is, in some ways, used to happen with Google search, but in many ways is more potent because ChatGPT or other chatbots, this is just an example because it's the most popular chatbot for consumers in the world. But any other chatbot becomes this companion that they have as opposed to a tool that they use. And I think that is a very important distinction when you start seeing your tools as your companions. And it doesn't help that the marketing presents it as a companion instead of a tool. So my worry is simply that the relationships that younger audiences might build with this will develop in ways that one, we cannot predict, and two, we cannot undo. So the mental health challenges that we're seeing emerge from these kinds of relationships with AI, even leading to really bad outcomes for a lot of younger and even older audiences. That's what worries me. However, on the other hand, a little bit of optimism comes in from the fact that these younger audiences are the same ones that are building incredible AI systems that are changing the world right now. The average age of the founder has gone down by quite a bit. The younger audiences are realizing that, hey, we can actually build stuff that impacts people, impacts lives, improves the standard of living for a lot of other people, builds better performing systems that compete with top companies out there, very well resourced companies. So I'm personally quite excited about the fact that AI is also enabling these younger audiences to disrupt technology and build systems that solve local problems and then scale that up. It is a challenging journey, no doubt, but the fact that they're able to take on this journey at such an early age should give us some kind of optimism about the access to AI that we are introducing for younger audiences. So there is a question of trade-offs, but it is not all bad. I have some optimism in the future for younger audiences and how they interact with AI, if we can figure out the challenges of these psychosocial risks that we are exposing them to.
Exactly, especially now that when we look at European countries, you know, some of them have banned computers totally from their elementary schools, from their schools, because they want their children to be free of this technology for them to explore before they, they face the technology of this world. So it's a debate, like you said, you know, should we introduce them and let them be creative in the AI technologies, or should we ban them till it is time for them to face the reality? How do you handle that? It's just a dilemma.
I think it is an important dilemma to tackle because I don't think bans work as successfully as people make it sound. I do think kids have a way of figuring out how to get to a technology, especially when they're not allowed to access it.
Yeah,
So, in that sense, yes, we can try bans, but I don't think in the long run a ban is a solution. I do think that most people who are trying to introduce a ban are really trying to say, make this a temporary ban so that we can figure out what the right relationship between kids and their AI should be. And I think that is an approach that I buy into. I just don't agree with there being a long term ban that just prevents any kind of kid from accessing AI. And we should have a distinction here. Like when I say kid, I mean like in their teens, a little older than their teens. So I don't mean like an 8-year old or a 6-year old should have an AI chatbot. I certainly agree that that is not a great idea. I don't think there is any use case they have that desperately needs AI so much so that we should incentivize them to access it all day. However, I do think that when you're in your teens, you encounter different kinds of problems that you might think of better solutions to if you had a co-ideation partner. I do think that there is a new age of education where your teacher is augmented by an extension, which is an AI coach that you could use in your non school hours that would still improve the way you do your schoolwork. So I think there are applications that AI can definitely unlock, but the structure of those relationships needs to be moderated. And that's where parents would come in, simply to understand what are the kinds of real use cases that their child is using AI for. Because it's not just you should have AI or you should not have AI, it's more about how are you using AI, what are you using it for, and what is the kind of relationship you're cultivating between the problems you want to solve and the tools you have at your disposal.
that's an excellent point. So, looking at that, many African countries have data protection laws, but very few have comprehensive AI legislations that are put in place as it is a new technology. So if we were to advise African governments today, what are the three most important legal safeguards that should be introduced immediately before this the kind of ill use of the technology goes any further? What are the ground rules that you recommend?
So, funnily enough, I did have a chance to actually speak to a lot of African governments through this program at the Policy Center for the New South in Morocco, which runs the Atlantic Dialogues Conference. And I was one of their Atlantic Dialogues emerging leaders not too long ago. So, the points that I had made back then, again, were about wider Atlantic challenges and the role of youth in helping solve those challenges. I'll start with the question you asked and then get to the other point that I wanted to make. I think from a data protection standpoint, the operating principle that governments should think about is we are very good at machine learning. We are not very good at machine unlearning. What that means is once you actually use your data to train a model, it's very hard to undo that process. And we have seen this in the images and video case where really large language models were created using massive data sets that had really harmful content from a child safety standpoint in those data sets that was only discovered much later. But these models were out there. There were different versions of them. There were open source checkpoints, benchmarks, smaller models, larger models, all trained on content that could have been very harmful. Pornographic content and child sexual abuse material potentially made its way into data sets outside of this as well. And so once those models are out there are people who are going to use models. There are people who are going to generate sexual content. There are people who are going to generate content that is potentially very harmful to younger audiences as well as older audiences. So I raise that as a point because child safety is something that governments often take much more seriously than other areas. So even if you're not thinking about data protection purely from the perspective of protecting the public, at least these kinds of use cases should be stirring you up to action to protect the data from younger audiences from getting into machine learning models without their consent or without the consent of a guardian. I just use that as a point to try to get people to think about this. However, the challenges go beyond just child safety, right? The challenges that you're going to run into when it comes to sovereign AI models are mostly around governance, around the compute and capacity needed to kind of host those models locally, and around moderation. Because when those models produce harmful content, you're going to have to already have the guardrails in place before you deploy the models, because the next thing you know, people are getting instructions to make weapons from these models. You cannot deploy these models without appropriate safety systems in place, not just to avoid the generation of this harmful content, but also to act when it messes up and this content is generated and sent out to people. We saw private details leaked by models for the data that it was trained on involving private details of people that it then leaked. We have seen cases where models were sycophantic and simply agreed with whatever you had to say, to the point where people went delusional, trying to believe that they have discovered some new theories or changed the way science works and things like that. Right? We have an ongoing debate about whether models are sentient and whether models have a life in that sense. So there are multiple challenges that emerge downstream that are in the scope of societal impact of these models that governments need to be prepared to deal with. And you will see that most of the frontier AI labs have a very active societal impacts and safety systems team in place to do this. One way to try to assess this is see the hiring, see the roles that they're hiring for and the kinds of teams that they're building out. And you will see that one of the biggest areas that at least I see teams constantly hiring is chemical, biological, and nuclear risks. Because these are real challenges that even if we have a problem one time, there may be no coming back from that. So those are challenges that I would place in front of governments. Like there are certainly data protection, privacy, and governance challenges, but there are also catastrophic risks and societal impacts related challenges that citizens are likely to face when you roll out these AI models with sovereign access.
That's a huge risk, or something that's really critical thing that we the governments have to really think about, because like you said, AI is very vast and it could be used in any shape or form. So people can use it for the good or for the bad. That's a risk. So one of the biggest questions surrounding AI is accountability. People using it have to be accountable. So, like you said, people can manufacture it and they can put it in on social media. So, who's going to be held accountable for this if an AI system causes harm, or for example, if there is a misfunction during a medical procedures, or if there is financial fraud. I think recently there was a news on regarding that an AI or something has been involved in some kind of financial disruptions. So who is going to be held accountable for this? The creators of AI or the ones that are using it? Who is going to be held accountable for this disrupting?
Right now, the challenge that we are facing is accountability is entirely a post hoc concept with full responsibility placed on the consumers of the content. Right? When you see something on social media, it is your job to ascertain whether this is true or false, whether to believe this, share this, or not share this. That has been the prevalent norm since even before AI came in, where a majority of the content we consume was our responsibility to try to adjudicate. Now, with AI, the challenge is shifting a little bit where governments are trying to hold model developers responsible for the kinds of outputs their models produce. It's not been successful yet. However, the idea behind this is to try to move the responsibility upstream. Because if you provide a model or a service and put it out there in the world, why would you not be responsible for the outputs it produces? That's the kind of logical reasoning that is being applied here. On the other hand, the companies are presenting this as we created a tool or a software or a product. It's up to you to use it, and therefore you are the one responsible for trying to moderate its misuse. I think there will end up being a balance between the model, like the frontier labs that are the model providers, and between the technology developers who are the ones providing services around these models. The challenge that we deal with is there are so many kinds of services possible that just physically it would be impossible for any kind of large company to try to tackle harms along each of these verticals. So then either you're saying that you cut off access and only allows a limited set of use cases, or what you're saying is you simply can't take all the responsibility. That's the operating principle, I think, on which we will design these governance systems for accountability. But my view is, I think it will be a shared responsibility between the people developing the technology or providing the service and the people building the models and providing the models itself.
It's a lot of responsibility, especially for the users. They have to make sure, or they have to update themselves on the technology and what is real and what's fake. They have to really know about these things. So in order not to spread false information. So it's everybody's responsibility. Certainly, the journalists and the general public have all a stake in this. So my next question is, around the world, countries are developing, like the US, are beginning to regulate AI, its use, and to what extent it is going to be used. And frameworks are such as the Free European Union AI Act are being developed. Should African countries develop its own AI governance framework through the African Union, or should each country create its own law, which is ideal for Africans as a group, as an African Union, or individually? What do you think?
I think it will end up being a shared framework. What I think applies across the table, there are a set of rules where you don't want any kind of AI models to admit catastrophic risks, the chemical, biological, nuclear challenges that might emerge from AI models. I don't think any country in the world wants to have AI models produce that kind of output. Right? On the other hand, there are healthcare specific nuances that in some countries are different from other countries. So, for example, in certain parts of India, if you recommend certain kinds of foods, people are not going to listen to it because this is not their culture to try to consume that kind of food. Even though that food may have medicinal value, even though that medicine may actually cure particular diseases that they have, it's simply not culturally aligned and the norms don't allow for it. So, where there is a normative question that influences what decisions people make, that's where you will have to have local regulation. And in that sense, I mean the state coming in and saying this is how we are going to govern the AI systems. However, there are a certain set of challenges that all countries are likely to face when AI is deployed to their public. On those fronts, it is going to be easier if we have a shared framework and say, hey, we agree to these kind of 8 or 10 principles on which we operate. And then within these principles, the pieces of kind of state level regulation kick in so that the principle is obeyed in general, but the specific regulation is going to be determined by the state level actors, presumably with participation from civil society and academia. Because at the end of the day, you need your researchers to be actively understanding how these impacts are changing every day. So that's the biggest problem I see. It's not really creating this shared framework, it's about ensuring that the shared framework is able to change as the AI models change and the technology grows, because we are seeing those changes emerge on a day to day basis at this point. And historically, we have never had regulation in the world, to my knowledge, that has been able to adapt to technology that changes day to day.
Yeah, like you said, it's a big challenge, and it has its own opportunities as well. And yes, I guess the Africans have to come up together to uh, set regulations, rules and regulations, or to monitor these kinds of things to better address the issue of misinformation and misuse, like you have said. So the next point is, like I've said, it's a very wide and evolving, day by day evolving technology, and some people worry that strict regulations could slow innovation, while others believe that lack of regulation could expose society to serious harm or misinformation damage, whatever you have it. How can Africa balance these two extremes? Encouraging innovation at the same time protecting its people, its citizens. How are the African leaders, African society, African IT experts like yourselves are going to deal with this kind of dilemma? What's the balance here?
So, my personal view is always that regulation has historically always trailed innovation. I don't think there have been many industries that we can cite examples of where there was regulation and therefore innovation completely failed to occur. In fact, in most industries, or I would say there are far more examples of there being regulation and innovation still finding a way. So I would argue a little bit that the regulation may be overblown when people say regulation is going to stifle or kill innovation, because innovation has a way of finding a way to rear up its head and disrupt anyway. On the other hand, I do understand that the challenge that people are trying to talk about there is policymakers and practitioners. are disjoint audiences, or just there are very few practitioners who turn into policymakers and vice versa, which means that policy is always at a disadvantage in terms of understanding how industry works. And the only people who end up actually influencing policy are often lobbyists who are paid by practitioners to make certain changes to policy. Right. So it turns out that the one resource that policymakers have access to is not an unbiased resource to understand how industry works. And that's where we have problems where regulation is either has no teeth or it has too many teeth. I feel with the right consultations, with the right involvement of multilateral stakeholders, states can make a huge difference to the way AI is deployed with regulation in place. And there, again, I will allude to the previous challenge I laid out. This is not a one time process. You have to keep this an open dialogue between governments and audiences where there is the possibility of rolling back a mistake that you made if regulation is turning out over a longer time period to stifle innovation. I think that's the challenge that most countries do not have a precedent for, where they just haven't had regulation that could be rolled back if people see that the impact of this regulation is not in the direction that you wanted it to be.
Okay, that's interesting. So, looking 10 years ahead, Africa has the a large number of young people, and these are potential users of AI, artificial intelligence, in the future. So, do you believe artificial intelligence will create more opportunities than risk for African, as we have a large young population? And what decisions must African leaders make today to ensure that AI benefits everyone rather than a privileged few, every African society? What do you recommend 10 years from now? How do you see this rolling out?
So it's very interesting that two or three experiences that I have had will influence the answer to this question. The first is I'm on the board of an organization called the Integrity Institute that is trying to advise policymakers in and around the world, primarily US, Europe, Latin America, and we're starting to move into countries in Asia and Africa as well. Because a lot of this same challenges have been faced in other countries that you are enlisting Africa is now likely to face. And my view is also informed by the kind of work that I have done with students in India over the last 8 to 12 years, where we have set up student organizations and seen how technology changes the way that their education takes place. Right, education is moving more and more outside the classroom over the last 8 to 10 years, at least in my view, in most countries around the world. Whether you say that's internships, whether you say that is AI actually giving them the ability to build their technologies, whether you say that it is online lectures, massive on open online courses have now become very popular around the world. And you can get videos from universities all around the world that you can then actually take as a course. So in that sense, I think the opportunity for African countries is setting up this high quality but the real challenge that I see for African countries is setting up the organizations that are going to have partnerships with these stakeholders, with student involvement, with civil society involvement, with academic involvement, and with practitioner involvement, so that regulation can be a joint process, not a one sided process. And there are often these roundtables that happen with no material outcomes, and the challenge there is, can we break out of that and actually start forcing roundtables and consultations to have written output so that we can actually take that and apply that at the time when we're writing regulation? So I think we're moving in that direction in general, with a lot of different stakeholders realizing the only way they can actually do this is by communicating very well what their stance is. And so there are all of these newsletters and podcasts and op-eds that people are writing all around the world, producing material output that can be used to inform regulation. And I think the challenge now is figuring out where you're going to get that information from, and then pulling it in, and then using it to inform what countries are likely to do. So, to summarize, the answer to your question, in my view, is building sovereign compute capacity so that you actually own the models, building capacity for guardrails so that your local norms influence the safety decisions that you make for those models. But by far, I think the bigger challenge here is preparing the audience for an information ecosystem that they're going to be entering or likely have already entered, where it's really hard to blindly trust everything that they see online, because this is really going to impact every single decision they make every single day.
Mm. Yeah, that's right. Because, like you said, the technology is evolving day by day. So, keeping up with the technology and adjusting the laws, regulations every day and every time, it's a huge task and something that's very challenging. So, if you were to speak heart to our African leaders, lawmakers, and educators, parents, and young people in general, if you were to speak one to one with them, what would your message be about building an AI future that is innovative, ethical, and safe at the same time? Could you just give us your recommendations or final message, if you will?
Find a way to become a model builder rather than a model consumer so that you understand the challenges that are involved in trying to produce this technology rather than just consume it or distribute it. I would close out with saying involve younger audiences in different parts of government, in different parts of these processes, these consultations. Because when you and I are not in the room, they're the ones who are going to have to make decisions that drive the rest of their lives. And we want them to be prepared because a lot of these decisions are not reversible.
That's a great advice that you have. So, with that, I think if you have final points that you think is missing that you want to transmit, I'll give you some 3 minutes if you have. If you don't, we will close. You have final words.
I'm happy to add a couple of points here that are helpful to understand. I think none of these problems are felt in isolation. If you are facing these problems, there is someone else in the world out there facing these problems as well. What's only left for you to do is find those people out there. I think the amount of funding being poured into AI systems is going to influence a lot of the how they need to grow in order to justify that level of funding. So it's not always that the performance of the technology is actually up to the mark that it is being communicated at, because that performance may be on use cases that don't relate to your country, your people, and your kinds of cultures. I think that's really important to understand because not all people and cultures respond the same way to the same kind of technology. So when you are thinking about which AI model to use, how do I deploy it for my audiences, I think it is really important to put yourself in their shoes and first ask, where do I need AI models? What are the tasks where this AI model is actually going to produce a material improvement in quality of life or performance of that task? And then benchmark it, evaluate it, construct those benchmarks and evaluations in a way that you can share it out and have others extend those benchmarks. I think that most important part of deploying technologies is assessing how good it is. And the only way you're going to be able to do this if you construct a benchmark in your language for your people or the audience in general that are going to be using that system. And that's really, really hard in a lot of use cases in healthcare and agriculture because you have to go out there and meet these practitioners where they are. It's really hard to just bring in doctors in a room and say, hey, how will this technology inform patient care? Because even the doctors won't necessarily know. So you will have to construct field experiments where you take this technology to the people and evaluate how well it does in the field before saying this is going to change the way your entire work flows. So, closing message, benchmarks, and evaluations. And I will add that the information ecosystem is far more important than anything else in this space. And that's where my life force has been dedicated. So I'm happy to chat more if those problems are top of mind for your countries focused on elections, healthcare, democracy, and policy.
Thank you very much. Like you said, you have covered a lot of a wide extent of the AI technology and like the technology that we have now. You are from the other side of the world, and we are communicating like we are close by. So it has a lot of advantage and it has also a lot of disadvantage, like you said, and it is up to the society to identify this and set rules and regulations to them. So, Mr. Swapneel, Mehta, thank you very much. Thank you for your time and your expert opinions and insights that you have provided for us. And goodbye till next time. I'm sure in the future we are going to discuss a lot more about AI technology as things evolve and new things are evolving, are coming up. So thank you very much. We will contact you in the future as well.
Thank you for the invitation. Have a nice rest of your day.
Okay. Well, dear viewers, that's all we have for this edition of African View. I'm sure you have learned a lot of things. Like Mr. Swapneel said, Africa has a large number of youngsters, young people that are eager to experiment with technology, with AI. They are easily the ones that are going to lead this technology to the future because they are innovative and innovations these days are coming up with these youngsters as well as they are at harm, at risk because there's a lot of misuse of this technology out there. So as parents, as government, as journalists, we have to identify this risk and put it out there for the society to learn, and everybody has to talk about this misuse of technology, AI technology, so our young people will not be misled or come to harm because a lot of these misinformations are taking away our youngsters as we see in the various media. So we have to take care of that and be at the forefront to protect our youngsters. So that's all we have. I'm sure you'll have a good insight into this, the AI technology, the pros and cons of this technology, and you'll spread the word that it is to be used in a good way, not misused or manipulate other people or misinformed to popularize some hate speech, those kinds of things. So with that, I bid you goodbye. Till next time, I'm Yodit.